She was confused, and you were the one controlling her medication and her money. That's what my brother said. Not in a private phone call, not in some heated argument at the kitchen table. He said it in a conference room in front of 2 attorneys, a trust administrator, and me, the woman who spent 12 years showing up every single Wednesday without being asked. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at him across that table. She anticipated you'd say that. She prepared for it. Garrett blinked. Just once. Then he leaned back in his chair and adjusted his tie like he hadn't heard me. But he had. If you've ever taken care of someone who was later used against you, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this story is far from over. Let me take you back. Because this didn't start in a conference room. It started 12 years ago in a small coastal cottage in Portland, Maine, with a woman named Estelle Rowe and a granddaughter who never once missed a Wednesday. I was 26 when I started visiting my grandmother every week. She was 72 then, still sharp, still stubborn, still making her own coffee and clipping coupons from the Portland Press Herald. She didn't need me to take care of her. Not at first, I just liked being there. I liked the way her kitchen smelled like bread and dish soap. I liked how she asked me about my bookkeeping clients by name, remembered their businesses, asked if the bakery on Congress Street ever got its tax penalty sorted out. She paid attention. That was the thing about Estelle. She paid attention to people who showed up. Over time, the visits became something more. By the time I was 29, I was managing her medications. 7 prescriptions, 2 of which had to be taken on opposing schedules. I built a chart, color-coded, laminated it, and taped it to the inside of her kitchen cabinet. I drove her to her oncology appointments at Maine Medical Center every 3 weeks for 2 years. Then it was cardiology, twice a month. Then a podiatrist, a neurologist, a dermatologist. Every appointment, every ride, every waiting room. That was me. Not because anyone asked me to, because I was the only one who showed up. My brother Garrett is 5 years younger than me, 33 now, married to Megan, who was 31. Garrett had always been the kind of man who walked into a room and made you feel like something exciting was about to happen. Charming, energetic, full of plans. The problem with Garrett's plans is that every single one of them required someone else's wallet. When Garrett was 22, our parents, Donald and Shirley, gave him $46,000 to start a business, some kind of digital marketing agency. It lasted 11 months. The money was gone in 8. Nobody asked where it went. Nobody called it a failure. Dad called it a learning experience. Mom said Garrett was finding his footing. When I was 22, I was working the front desk at a tax preparation office for $14.50 an hour studying for my bookkeeping certification at night, and nobody called that anything at all. By the time I was 30, I had built my own firm. 220 small business clients across southern Maine, averaging $2,100 per client annually. Net income, $194,000 a year. I didn't talk about it at family dinners. I didn't need to. The people who needed to know, my clients, my employees, the IRS, they knew. My parents did not, or if they did, they never said so. What they said instead was that I was hovering. That's the word my father used. Donald Rowe, 67, retired attorney, a man who once practiced estate law in the same city where his own mother lived alone for the last decade of her life. He said I was hovering over Estelle. He said it at Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago with the turkey still on the table and my grandmother sitting 6 feet away. Adelaide's always been like this, he said, not looking at me. She hovers. She finds someone to orbit. It's her way of feeling needed. Shirley nodded. She always nodded. Garrett wasn't at that Thanksgiving. He and Megan had gone to Megan's parents' house in New Hampshire. They sent Estelle a gift card, $25 to a restaurant in Portsmouth, 40 minutes from Estelle's house, in a town she hadn't driven to in 3 years because she'd stopped driving. That was the last Thanksgiving Estelle had with any of us besides me. 3 years. That's how long Garrett and Megan went without visiting Estelle. 3 full years. No Wednesdays, no holidays, no drives to the doctor, no calls that lasted longer than 4 minutes. I know because Estelle kept a small notebook by the phone. She wrote down who called, when, and for how long. I didn't find that notebook until after she died. The last entry with Garrett's name was dated 37 months before her death. 4 minutes. He called to ask if she'd received a piece of his mail that had been forwarded to the wrong address. 4 minutes. For his grandmother. During those same 3 years, I logged 156 Wednesday visits. I drove her to 94 medical appointments. I organized her insurance paperwork twice when her supplemental plan changed carriers. I replaced her hot water heater when it failed in January. $1,800 out of my own pocket, never mentioned to anyone. I hired a lawn service for $120 a month when she could no longer manage the yard. I sat with her on the porch in the summer and read her the local news because her eyes had gotten too tired for small print by evening. I didn't keep a ledger of these things at the time. I didn't need to. I wasn't building a case. I was taking care of my grandmother, but Estelle was keeping track. I didn't know that then. I wouldn't know it until a sealed envelope was placed on a conference table by a man named Stuart Clark, 3 weeks after she died. Estelle passed it home, 4 months before the hearing that opened this story. It was a Tuesday evening. I was there. I had come by after work because she'd sounded tired on the phone that morning. Not sick, just tired in a way that was different from her usual tired. I made her tea. I sat in the chair beside her bed. She squeezed my hand once, and then the squeeze got lighter, and then it stopped. I called the hospice nurse. I called Stuart Clark, her estate attorney. I sat on the porch for a long time in the dark and listened to the waves. I did not call Garrett. I did not call my parents. Not that night. That night was mine and Estelle's. The next morning, I made the calls. Garrett picked up on the 4th ring. He said, "Oh, okay." Then he asked when the will reading would be. My mother cried. My father cleared his throat and asked if I had contact information for the estate attorney. The funeral was small, 14 people. Garrett and Megan stood in the back row and left before the reception. Megan wore sunglasses indoors. Garrett shook 2 people's hands on the way out. Neither of them was me. As sole trustee, a role Estelle had named me to 7 years earlier, I began reviewing the trust accounts 2 days after the funeral. Standard procedure. I knew the total value, $538,000, including the cottage appraised at $312,000. The designations were clear. Garrett and Megan, $215,000. Donald and Shirley, $108,000, the remainder to me. I sat at my kitchen table at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, 3 days after we buried her. The house was dark except for the glow of my laptop screen. I opened the banking portal for the trust's custodial account and began reviewing the transaction history. That's when I saw them, 3 flagged withdrawal attempts. The first, $87,000, wired to a business checking account registered to Garrett Rowe. The second, $76,000 flagged by the trust's banking institution before it cleared. The third, $52,000 submitted just 2 days before I'd contacted Stuart Clark to begin the formal administration. $87,000, $76,000, $52,000, totaling $215,000 at Crange. The exact amount of Garrett's designated share, attempted before the trust had even been formally opened. Each withdrawal had a trustee signature page attached. My name was on every one of them. It was not my signature. I stared at the screen for a long time. The streetlight cut through the blinds and striped the wall behind me. The house was silent. I scrolled through each filing slowly. The signature was close. Someone had studied my handwriting. But the capital A in Adelaide leaned wrong. The tail on the R in Rowe looped too high. And at the bottom of each page, pressed into the paper in faded blue ink, was a notarization stamp. I recognized the registration number. It belonged to my father's retired law office. Donald Rowe, 67 years old, retired attorney. My father had notarized forged documents bearing my name so that his son could drain our dead grandmother's trust before the dirt had settled on her grave. I closed the laptop. I set my hands flat on the kitchen table. I sat in the dark for a very long time. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call Garrett. I didn't call my father. Something inside me shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. Like a door latch clicking into place from the inside. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. I went to bed. I set my alarm for 6. In the morning, I called Stuart Clark. I called Stuart Clark at 8:12 a.m. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I'd found: 3 flagged withdrawals, forged signature pages, a notarization stamp from a retired law office. I read him the registration number on the stamp. He was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. Then he said, "Adelaide, I need you to come to my office this afternoon. There are things your grandmother left in my custody that are now relevant. Bring the screenshots, print everything." I said, "I already have." He paused again. Then very quietly he said, "She told me you would." I didn't ask what he meant. Not yet. I printed every page. I organized them by date, by amount, by filing sequence. I put them in a manila folder with labeled tabs. I drove to Stuart Clark's office at 2:15 p.m. and sat in the same leather chair I'd sat in 3 years earlier when Estelle first asked me to be her trustee. Stuart closed the door. He sat across from me, and then he placed a sealed envelope on the desk between us. It was cream-colored. Heavy stock. My name was written across the front in Estelle's handwriting. The handwriting I'd watched tremble and slow over 12 years of grocery lists and birthday cards, but never lose its shape. She gave this to me 6 months before she passed, Stewart said. Her instructions were specific. I was to hold it sealed and produce it only after her death, only in your presence, and only when the trust came under challenge or review. I looked at the envelope. I didn't touch it yet. She also instructed me to produce a second document at the same time. He opened a file folder and placed a single sheet beside the envelope. This is a cognitive evaluation conducted by Dr. Francis Reed, Estelle's physician. It's dated the same month the morality clause was embedded in the trust. I looked at the date. I looked at the clause reference number. They matched. She planned this, I said. She anticipated it, Stewart corrected gently. There's a difference. I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pages of Estelle's handwriting, slightly uneven but perfectly legible. I won't share every word. Some of it was private, meant only for me, about the summers I spent on her porch as a girl, about the bread we used to bake on Saturday mornings, about the way she said I reminded her of her own mother. But the second page contained a paragraph I will never forget. She wrote, "Your father and brother will come for the money before the flowers on my grave have wilted. I know this the way I know the tide schedule. Not because anyone told me, but because I've watched the pattern long enough. Donald will use his credentials to make it look proper. Garrett will use his charm to make it feel reasonable. And you, my girl, will be the one left holding the receipts and the grief." I set the letter down. I pressed both hands flat on the desk, the same way I'd pressed them flat on my kitchen table 12 hours earlier. I breathed in once. I breathed out once. "What's the morality clause?" I asked. Stewart explained. Estelle had embedded a provision in the trust that automatically forfeited any beneficiary's designated share upon documented evidence of fraud, theft, or attempted theft against the trust or its trustee. It didn't require a court order. It didn't require a vote. The evidence itself triggered the forfeiture. Stewart, as the administering attorney, had the authority to invoke it based on the banking records, the forged signatures, and the notarization stamp. "She built the lock," Stewart said. "Your brother provided the key." I nodded. I didn't smile. There was nothing to smile about. A woman I loved had spent the last months of her life preparing for her own family to rob her estate. She had done it alone, without telling me, because she didn't want me to carry the weight while she was still alive. I carried it now. I carried it clearly. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Nothing yet," Stewart said. "Let them file. Let them challenge. Every move they make from this point on strengthens your position. When they come, and they will come, I'll have the evaluation, the letter, and the banking records ready." He was right. They came. 4 weeks after Estelle's death, Garrett filed a petition challenging her mental competency at the time the morality clause was drafted. His argument was simple. Estelle had been elderly, declining, and under the influence of a caregiver, me, who stood to benefit financially from the clause. He called it undue influence. His attorney submitted a motion requesting the clause be voided. 2 weeks after that, my father hired a private investigator. The PI surveilled my home and my bookkeeping office. I first noticed the car, a gray sedan, parked across the street from my office on a Wednesday afternoon. It was there again on Thursday. By the following Monday, it had appeared outside my house twice. I didn't confront the driver. I didn't mention it to anyone except Stuart Clark. "Document everything," Stewart said. "Dates, times, license plate. Don't approach. Don't engage." I didn't. I photographed the vehicle from my office window. I logged the dates and times in a spreadsheet. I saved everything. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. 220 clients trust me to keep their records clean and organized. I applied the same discipline to this. By week 8, I had 14 time-stamped photographs and a detailed surveillance log. Stewart submitted it to the hearing file 2 days before the Trust Administration hearing as Exhibit C. Evidence of ongoing harassment by a beneficiary's family member against the trustee. My father had hired someone to follow me to find proof I was unfit. Instead, he handed us proof that he was. The hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in a conference room at Stuart Clark's firm. Garrett sat on one side of the table with his attorney. Megan sat beside him. My parents sat 2 chairs down, Donald in a navy blazer, Shirley beside him with her hands folded, eyes on the table. I sat across from them with Stuart. The room was quiet. No raised voices, no dramatic entrances, just 6 people, 2 attorneys, a trust administrator, and a sealed record that was about to be opened. Garrett's attorney spoke first. He presented the competency challenge. Then Garrett leaned forward and addressed the room directly. She was a confused woman in her final years, and the person controlling her medication schedule was the same person who drafted the clause that benefits her exclusively. We're asking this board to consider what that means. His attorney had used the phrase undue influence 4 times in 7 minutes. Garrett delivered the weapon himself. Then Stewart stood. He opened his file folder. "Before I respond to the petition," he said, "I'd like to enter 3 documents into the record." He placed the first on the table. Exhibit A, a sealed letter written by Estelle Rowe to her granddaughter Adelaide, dictated and signed 6 months before her death, in the presence of a witness, and held in my custody per her written instructions. He opened the envelope and read 1 paragraph aloud, his voice even. "Your father and brother will come for the money before the flowers on my grave have wilted. I know this the way I know the tide schedule, not because anyone told me, but because I've watched the pattern long enough. Donald will use his credentials to make it look proper. Garrett will use his charm to make it feel reasonable. And you, my girl, will be the one left holding the receipts and the grief." He set it down. No one in the room spoke. He placed the second. Exhibit B, a cognitive evaluation conducted by Dr. Francis Reed, Estelle's physician of 11 years, dated the same month the morality clause was embedded in the trust document. Dr. Reed's evaluation documented full decisional capacity. She is available to confirm the timeline if the board requires her testimony. Garrett's attorney opened his mouth. Stewart didn't pause. Exhibit C, a 14-entry surveillance log compiled by Adelaide Rowe over a 6-week period, documenting a private investigator retained by Donald Rowe to monitor the trustee's home and place of business. Time-stamped photographs are included. He set the folder down and looked directly at Garrett's attorney. The competency challenge fails on its face. The evaluation was conducted specifically to preempt this motion. Your client's grandmother anticipated it. The surveillance log establishes a pattern of harassment against the trustee by a co-beneficiary's family, and the banking records, which I will now read into the record, document 3 forged withdrawal attempts totaling $215,000, each bearing a fraudulent trustee signature and a notarization stamp traceable to the retired law license of Donald Rowe. He turned to Donald's attorney directly. The notarization stamp used on all 3 filing pages matches the registration number of a retired license. Your client provided that stamp. We have the serial records. The room went still. Stewart read the amounts: $87,000, $76,000, $52,000. He read the dates. He read the account numbers. He read the registration number on the notarization stamp and confirmed it matched Donald's retired license on file with the Maine Board of Overseers of the Bar. Then he said the words that ended it. Under the morality clause embedded in Section 7.4 of the Estelle Rowe Revocable Trust, any beneficiary whose documented conduct constitutes fraud, theft, or attempted theft against the trust or its trustee forfeits their designated share in full. The evidence is sufficient. I am invoking the clause administratively. He looked at Garrett. Your designated share of $215,000 is forfeited. He looked at Donald. Your designated share of $108,000, yours and Shirley's, is forfeited for facilitating the forgery and the harassment campaign against the trustee. He paused. The room was completely silent. Not the kind of silence that waits for someone to speak, the kind that presses down. The full trust, $538,000, consolidates under the sole control of Adelaide Rowe. Garrett didn't move. He sat perfectly still with both hands on the table, staring at Stewart Clark like he was waiting for the sentence to rearrange itself into something different. It didn't. Megan's hand shot across the table and gripped Garrett's forearm. Her knuckles went white. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "All of it?" Stewart Clark looked at her, not unkindly, not warmly, just clearly. "All of it." Donald sat rigid in his chair. His jaw worked once like he was going to speak, then stopped. Shirley's hands stayed folded in her lap. She didn't look up. She didn't look at anyone. His silence wasn't confusion. It was recognition. He knew exactly what that notarization stamp meant. He'd known since the day he pressed it into the paper. Garrett finally spoke. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the fracture underneath. You can't just... That clause wasn't legitimate. She was 83 years old when she was 84. I kept my eyes on him and didn't move. The room turned to me. It was the first time I'd spoken since the hearing began. She was 84, and she scored in the 93rd percentile on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment the same month she filed the clause. Dr. Reed administered it at Estelle's request, not mine. I didn't know about the evaluation until 3 weeks ago. I kept my voice steady. I didn't lean forward. I didn't raise a single syllable. I didn't know about the letter, either. I didn't know about the morality clause. She did all of this without telling me, because she knew I would have tried to talk her out of it. She knew I would have said, "They're family. Give them the benefit of the doubt." And she knew, better than I did, that the doubt had run out. Garrett stared at me. For the first time in the entire hearing, he had nothing to say. Stuart Clark closed his folder. He aligned the edges carefully and set it flat on the table. The administrative invocation is filed. The trust consolidation will be processed within 14 business days. Any challenge to this decision will require a full evidentiary hearing, at which point all 3 exhibits, including the surveillance log and the forged signature pages, will be entered into the public record. He let that settle. The public record, Garrett's fraud, Donald's notarization stamp, all of it searchable, permanent, attached to their names. Nobody challenged. Garrett stood first. His chair scraped against the floor. Megan stood beside him, still gripping his arm. Neither of them looked at me. They walked to the door. Garrett paused with his hand on the frame. And for 1 second, I thought he was going to turn around. I thought he was going to say something, an apology, a denial, an accusation, anything. He didn't. He walked out. Megan followed. The door stayed open behind them. My parents stood next. Donald buttoned his blazer with both hands, slowly, like a man leaving a courtroom where the verdict went the wrong way. Shirley kept her eyes on the floor. She hadn't spoken a single word the entire hearing. My father stopped at the door. He turned, not toward me, but toward Stuart Clark. "This isn't finished," he said. Stuart didn't look up from the folder he was organizing. "It is, Mr. Rowe." The door closed softly behind them. No slam. Just the quiet click of the latch sliding into place. Stuart and I sat in the silence for a moment. The conference room felt larger with just the 2 of us in it. "Are you all right?" he asked. I nodded once. I was, not happy, not triumphant, not sad, just clear. "There's one more thing," Stuart said. He reached into the folder and withdrew a single page. "Donald's notarization on those signature pages. The registration number is tied to his retired license. I'll be filing a referral with the Maine Board of Overseers of the bar within 2 weeks." I looked at the page. I looked at my father's registration number. I nodded again. "She told me something once," I said. "Estelle." She said, "The people who do the paperwork are the ones who decide what's real." I thought she was talking about taxes. Stuart almost smiled. Almost. I stood. I collected my copy of the file. I thanked him. I walked out of the office, down the hall, through the lobby, and into the parking lot. My phone buzzed before I reached my car. Garrett. I pressed decline without hesitation. It buzzed again. Dad. Decline. Again. Mom. Decline. By the time I started the engine, there were 7 missed calls. I turned off the ringer. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat. I pulled out of the lot and drove north toward the coast. The calls kept coming for the next 3 days. 41 missed calls, 19 voicemails. I deleted each one without listening. Garrett showed up at my office on the second day. I saw him through the window, pacing on the sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear, shirt untucked, looking like he hadn't slept. I didn't go to the door. He stood there for 11 minutes, then drove away. My mother sent a text on the 3rd night. It said, "Adelaide, please. This is tearing the family apart. Call your father." I read it once. I set the phone down. I didn't respond. On the 4th day, I went through my contacts. I blocked Garrett's number. I blocked Megan's. I blocked my mother's. I blocked my father's. I removed myself from the family group chat. I deleted the thread without reading the last 40 messages. I removed their names from my emergency contact list at my office and at my doctor's. I changed the code on my office alarm system. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. The door was closed, not slammed. Just closed, with the quiet click of the lock sliding into place from the inside. I drove to the cottage that evening. The key was already on my keychain. It had been for 11 years. Ever since Estelle pressed it into my palm one Wednesday afternoon and said, "I don't want you standing on the porch waiting if I'm slow getting to the door." I never took it off. Even after she died. Even after the funeral. The key stayed where it was, wedged between my office key and my car key, warm from my pocket, worn smooth at the edges. The drive took 22 minutes. The road narrowed past the Scarborough marshes and curved along the coast where the houses thinned out and the trees leaned inland from decades of wind. Estelle's cottage sat at the end of a gravel lane, pale blue with white trim, the porch light on a timer she'd set 11 years ago, and I'd never changed. I parked in the same spot I always parked. I walked up the 3 porch steps the same way I always had. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood in the kitchen for a long time without turning on any lights. The house smelled like her, not perfume. Estelle never wore perfume. It smelled like dish soap and old wood and the faint trace of the lavender sachets she kept in every drawer. The kitchen window let in the last of the evening light, casting a warm rectangle across the floorboards and onto the edge of the counter, where she used to set her coffee cup every morning. I sat on the porch. The chair was the same wicker rocker I'd sat in hundreds of times. The cushion was faded. The armrest had a crack I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. I sat down, and I took the letter out of my bag. I had read the first 2 pages at Stuart's office, the paragraph about my father and brother, the memories of bread on Saturday mornings, the part about her own mother, but I hadn't read the last page. Not yet. I'd folded the letter carefully after the second page and put it back in the envelope, and I'd carried it with me since. I hadn't been ready. Not in a conference room, not at my kitchen table, not anywhere that didn't feel like hers. The porch felt like hers. I unfolded the last page. The handwriting was slightly more uneven here. She had been tired when she wrote it, I could tell. The letters leaned a little more. The spacing widened. But every word was legible. Every word was deliberate. The last paragraph read, "I am not leaving you this cottage because it is valuable. I am leaving it to you because you are the only one who ever sat on this porch and stayed until the stars came out. You didn't come for the money, Adelaide. You came for me. You were the only one who showed up, dear. Not for the money, but for me." I folded the letter. I set it on my knee. I looked at the water. The tide was pulling back from the rocks, slow and quiet, the way it always did at this hour. The porch light clicked on behind me. The timer, right on schedule, the same time every night. I felt nothing dramatic. No rush of triumph. No wave of grief. I felt clear, like the air after a storm passes through and takes everything heavy with it. I sat there until the stars came out. Then I went inside, locked the door, and slept in Estelle's guest room for the first time in 4 months. I slept through the night. I woke without dread. 3 weeks passed. I didn't hear from anyone in my family. The silence was not heavy. It was the first real peace I'd had in months. I went back to work. My 220 clients didn't know anything had happened, and they didn't need to. Tax season was approaching. I had quarterlies to file, reconciliations to review, 2 new restaurant clients onboarding in South Portland. The work was steady. The work was mine. It had always been mine. The cottage was mine now too, legally. $312,000 in appraised value, part of the $538,000 trust consolidation. I didn't list it. I didn't renovate it. I drove out on Wednesdays. I sat on the porch. I kept the porch light on its timer. I fixed the crack in the armrest of the wicker rocker with wood glue and a clamp, the way Estelle had taught me to fix things. Slowly, carefully, without rushing. The details about what happened to the rest of them came to me the way details always come in Portland, through industry channels, mutual acquaintances, and the quiet machinery of public records. I did not seek the information. I did not call anyone to ask. But Portland is a small city, and the legal community is smaller, and when a retired attorney's license gets referred to the main board of overseers of the bar, people talk. Donald's referral was processed within 2 weeks of the hearing, just as Stewart had said. His retired license, already inactive, was formally suspended pending investigation. The specifics of the referral were straightforward. He had provided notarization on 3 fraudulent legal filings using a stamp registered to his former office. For a man who had built his identity on procedure and propriety, whose entire authority over the family had been rooted in the language of law and legitimacy, the referral stripped him of the one thing he valued more than money, his credential, his standing. He did not tell Shirley the full scope of what the referral meant for 6 weeks. When she found out, through a letter from the board that arrived at the house while he was at a doctor's appointment, She reportedly sat at the kitchen table and didn't speak for the rest of the day. A mutual acquaintance told me this secondhand. I did not confirm it. I did not need to. Garrett's collapse took longer but cut deeper. His business, some kind of consulting operation, loosely defined, the latest in a string of ventures that always seemed to require an infusion of outside capital, had been counting on the $215,000 inheritance to cover operating costs. Without it, the math stopped working within weeks. He couldn't make payroll by month 2. 2 employees left, one to a competitor, one out of the industry entirely. The office lease in Falmouth came up for renewal at month 4. He didn't renew it. By month 6, Garrett and Megan listed their 4-bedroom house in Falmouth. It sold for $14,000 less than they owed on the mortgage. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental in Westbrook, a town Megan had once described, at a family dinner I still remembered, as where ambition goes to stall. Their son Cole was pulled from the private enrichment program at Greeley Middle School, $380 a month. Gone. Megan's car, a 3-year-old SUV she'd leased, was returned to the dealer when they couldn't keep up the payments. She drove Garrett's 8-year-old sedan for 2 months before they traded it for something older and cheaper. Background checks on Garrett's employment applications surfaced the trust hearing record. Stewart had warned them that a challenge would put everything in the public file. They challenged anyway. Now the forged signature pages, the notarization stamp, the forfeiture, all of it was searchable, permanent, attached to his name. Job applications went nowhere. Garrett, 33 years old, charming, energetic, full of plans, and now unhireable by anyone who ran a basic background check. I learned these details over the course of 8 months. I learned them the way you learn the weather has changed, not by going outside to check, but by noticing the light shift through the window while you're doing something else. I did not call Garrett. I did not call my parents. I did not drive past the Westbrook apartment. I did not search for court records. The information arrived, and I noted it, and I continued with my work. There was a moment, once, when I almost felt something close to guilt. It was a Wednesday evening, driving back from the cottage. I passed the exit for Falmouth and thought about Cole. He was a child. He hadn't forged anything. He hadn't notarized anything. He was just a boy whose parents had gambled his stability on money they hadn't earned and a scheme they couldn't sustain. But the guilt passed quickly. Because the truth was simple, I didn't do this to them. Estelle didn't do this to them. They did this to themselves. They forged my signature. They stole from a dead woman's trust. They hired someone to follow me, and when they were given every chance to stop, to withdraw the petition, to walk away with nothing more than embarrassment, they pressed harder. The morality clause didn't punish them. It described them. 1 year after the hearing, I sat on Estelle's porch on a Wednesday evening in early October. The air was sharp and clean. The tide was coming in, the water dark and flat. I had a cup of tea in my hands. The same mug Estelle used to use, white ceramic with a chip on the handle she refused to throw away. My firm had grown to 231 clients. I had hired a second full-time bookkeeper. The quarterly reviews were done. The cottage porch had been repainted, the same pale blue, the same white trim. I'd planted a window box with herbs the way Estelle always said she wanted to but never got around to. Basil and rosemary and one stubborn parsley plant that wouldn't quit. The letter was inside, in the top drawer of Estelle's writing desk, in the same cream-colored envelope. I didn't need to read it again. I knew every word. I sat in the wicker rocker with the repaired armrest and watched the stars come out, one by one, the way they always did from that porch. The house was warm behind me. The porch light clicked on at its usual time. I didn't come for the money. She knew that. That was the only thing either of us ever needed to get right. Some doors close so better ones can open. This one closed with a quiet click, and on the other side was a cottage, a porch, a cup of tea, and the kind of peace that comes only from knowing you showed up for the right reasons, every single time, without being asked. I never regretted a single second of it. If you enjoyed this story about standing your ground, honoring the people who truly loved you, and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.